Joining the podcast is former BCS national champion at Alabama and former offensive lineman for the Atlanta Falcons, Mike Johnson. Mike, thank you for joining me. You doing all right?
I'm doing great, man. Just coming off the Thanksgiving week and all the craziness that has been college football, and right in the thick of it. And it's one of my favorite times of year, man. Early December, starting to get cold outside, and ramping up for Christmas, and the football is just good. So yeah, man, happy to be here with you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. And speaking of, what did you think of rivalry week this past week with all the drama and all the altercations and everything that went down?
Well, you know what's funny? Obviously, living and working in Atlanta and following Georgia Tech very closely. I watched that game Friday night. I almost couldn't keep my eyes open. That game was going on so late, 8 overtimes. And having been in Alabama when Kirby Smart was there, but also having a relationship with Brent Key because of his time in Alabama, I just thought, man, it was cool to watch Kirby and Brent Key go toe to toe and really embrace each other at the end of the game. And I was like, man, this is what rivalry week's all about, sportsmanship, and all this stuff. And then Saturday comes around and there's like, 8 melees on rivalry Saturday. So it was good, man. I mean, the passion's still there with college football, and you love those rivalry games to be passionate. You don't like it to get out of hand, but you like the passion that comes along with college football and the allegiance that comes along with it. And I think that a lot of schools probably went overboard, but I for one like the passion. I think that's one thing that I get worried about in the future of college football is that allegiance. You know what I mean? That the guys that change teams 2 and 3 times, but it just it's one of those things that's kind of taking its natural course. I thought the rivalry weekend was pretty action packed.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, that's what you want to see out of rivalry weekend, and not to open up this can of worms, but you know how it is with NIL and transfer portal and stuff. You kind of worry about the future of college football and guys having pride in playing for their school or playing in certain rivalry games. But I know you're doing some radio
Yeah,
stuff for. Go ahead.
No, well, I was going to say, one of the ones that kind of jumped out at me was Isaiah Bond after he catches the 4th and 31 for Alabama. You're like, man, this guy's going to go down in Bama history. And then, a month later, he's headed to Texas. And you're like, uh, okay, that's, I just think of so many moments, that they play in Bryant-Denny Stadium on the big screen and Daniel Moore pictures and all the tradition that comes along with that. And to think that that was one of his last plays at Alabama just it's kind of hard to stomach when you talk about college football these days, but it is what it is, man. I don't think there's anybody to really fault or blame. It's just one of those things.
Do you think that certain NFL teams could interpret a guy that's gone to three or four different schools and kind of think that, hey, maybe this guy has, a lack of commitment, or if we draft this guy, or is he going to want to get traded or not show up to practice because things aren't going his way? Do you think that's, I know a lot of things play into why guys leave and everything, but do you think the NFL teams are watching that closely?
I don't believe so, man, because that's how the NFL is. I get a lot of questions sometimes about the Falcons and Saints rivalry, and it's good. It's really good, but it's NFL rivalries are more of a fan base rivalry than they are actual players, because the players, I mean, Lord knows, I think I had 4 or 5 teammates that one week are playing for the Falcons, and then 2 weeks later they're playing for the Saints. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure that there are all kinds of craziness in the front offices of NFL. They'll pretty much try to find a reason not to draft you. I would say that most of them don't take it as a negative if you transfer, but I think that a lot of them might take it as a positive if you do stay. So I kind of flip that around and say, if you're a guy that guts out 5 years at a program and bides your time and puts the work in to develop as a player, then there's a lot of teams that would look highly at that. So it's kind of the other way around for me.
Well, I know you're doing some radio stuff for 92.9 The Game there in Atlanta covering the Falcons. So I wanted to get your opinion on this. Since you played for the Falcons, they've built a new stadium and they've kind of recreated their look, their uniform. But can we both agree, even though Mercedes-Benz Stadium is awesome, there was just something about the Georgia Dome?
Oh man, listen, you're asking the right guy. Um, I think I was let's see, I was 3-1 in the Georgia Dome in college. played there against Clemson in 2008 to open the season. We lost to Florida in the SEC title game in '08, but my senior year in 2009, we opened against Virginia Tech. Tyrod Taylor and that crew were able to get a dub out of that and then made it all the way back. So we played 4 games in my last 2 seasons at Bama. We played 4 games in the Georgia Dome. And I remember distinctly after the week after we beat Florida in 2009, a group of us, probably 6 or 7 guys, went back to Atlanta. John Parker Wilson was with the Falcons at that time. We went back to the Georgia Dome a week later and went to the Falcons game and got a chance to watch that and be around that. And then just a few months after that, I'm able to get drafted and play a few more seasons there. So I'm with you. The mystique, the look of the Georgia Dome, going all the way back to its time holding the SEC championship in the mid '90s. There was just something about the look to that place that was just nostalgic for me, and always will. It'll always hold a special place in my heart. Mercedes-Benz Stadium is a unique venue, and I think a lot of people, like going there and attending games and everything else. But there was just something about that Georgia Dome that was a special place.
And just a little side note, I think we probably could have kept the uniforms we had. I don't know about these new ones we got, but anyway, that
Yeah.
leads me right into my next question. I was going to ask you, since you've played at the Georgia Dome so much in college, how much did that help you get comfortable as a rookie?
More or less. I didn't. Let's see. I'm trying to think when I actually started suiting up as a rookie. I can't even remember. It's just one of those things. Actually, getting comfortable with the NFL game and a different style of offense than what we ran at Alabama under Jim McElwain. We ran the ball a lot, and obviously Mark Ingram wins the Heisman in 2009, and you get to Atlanta and things are just done differently. A lot of things, different styles, different techniques, and all that kind of stuff. That was more of the hard part. It definitely helped having your surroundings. I think that I was fortunate more than a lot of the guys that I was rookies with that, um, I spent my entire career in the Southeast. I'm from Pensacola, Florida. I go 4 hours up the road to Tuscaloosa, spend 5 years there. And then, 3.5 hours east of Tuscaloosa, you get to come to Atlanta and spend the next 5 years. And at that point, after that, I was done trying to chase the football dream. So I was very fortunate. I mean, there's guys that come from. I had teammates from Kansas and Montana and Las Vegas and all over the country when you get to the Falcons. And I was the one guy that actually kind of knew my way around Atlanta at that point. So it definitely didn't hurt. And obviously, I loved Atlanta enough to stay here for the long term. And I've enjoyed this place ever since.
The Montana teammate you mentioned, is that Croy Bierman by chance?
Well, yeah, well, that was one of them. We actually had another guy that was drafted with me. His name was Shan Schillinger. He was my age, Montana guy. I think he was a sixth rounder. But yeah, him and Croy, I believe, were college teammates together. Croy's just 1 or 2 years older than me. So yeah, both of them.
Okay, okay. You mentioned Pensacola. You were a four-star recruit at Pine Forest High School there in Pensacola, which is pretty incredible because you didn't even start playing football until the ninth grade. But walk me through why you chose to sign with Alabama because this would have been what the year before Saban got there. So what sold you on Alabama? And then a little two-parter, when Saban did get there, how much did the culture change?
Well, this is actually a good story. So I signed in the February 2005. So I actually spent 2 years under Mike Shula. I redshirted in '05 and then spent 2006. So I actually had no plans to play football in college. And the story goes that I wanted to play football to get in shape for baseball season as a freshman. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just tall. I was only about 200 pounds as a freshman. Really enjoyed lifting weights at the time. Lift weights really hard. Started gaining weight, 20, 25 pounds each off season. I went into the spring jamboree, we called it down there, before my senior year, and I went into that game at about 6'5", 275. So all of a sudden, I've gone from a nobody on the radar, the junior year, sophomore years before that, to all of a sudden being, the biggest kid on the field after jumping up from about 245, 275. In attendance that night just so happened to be Bobby Connolly, who was Alabama's offensive line coach, and he had never heard of me. Obviously, nobody had. And that night, somebody passed him my phone number. That night, he loved the way I played, and Bobby Connolly calls me up that night. It's probably got to be 11:30, local time there in Pensacola. He was still driving around, I think driving back to Tuscaloosa, and he said, "Hey, who all has been in contact with you? Who's talking to you?" And I said, "Nobody. I don't even know what you're talking about." And he said, "So no football school has contacted you, period. None of them." And I was like, "Nope." So Bobby basically said, "Hey, I'd like to offer you a scholarship, but we want to get you on campus in Tuscaloosa." About 3 weeks after that spring jamboree, I went up and met with Mike Shula, went through a senior camp, a 1 day senior camp up on, at the complex up there, the Malmore complex, and got offered a scholarship that day. Wanted to commit. Bobby Connolly basically says, "We'd love to take your commitment. We're the only offer you have. If we're going to go out on a limb like this and offer you and be your first offer, we want you to, kind of ensure us that you're not going to look anywhere else." And I said, "Coach Connolly, if I'm able to commit to you guys, I'll completely shut everything down. I don't have any, reason not to." So I committed to Alabama the summer before my senior year, having that one offer. I started getting calls from Florida and LSU and Auburn and all over the place. All these schools all of a sudden contacted me, and just kind of shut it down from there. I was Alabama through and through. They kind of took a chance on me, and I wanted to take a chance on them. So that did, to answer your second part of your question, that kind of made it, not fun when Mike Shula did get fired. I kind of took that one really personally because I think, he took a chance on me. I believed in him as a coach. But when Coach Saban was hired, things obviously very, very different. And a lot's been made of when coaches take over programs. I was not a fan of the way Dion did things at Colorado, and I really liked Dion, but Dion walked in and said, that he was kind of bringing his own Louis bags. That's not the approach Nick Saban had. Nick Saban basically walked in, gave everybody a clean slate, said, "I don't know what you did before now, but it's a clean slate, and if you're going to work hard from here on out, then I'd love to have you, stay here." So I kind of grabbed the bull by the horns on that one. Decided to really amp things up a gear and really try to make an imprint on the program. And lucky for me, Coach Saban noticed that, as did our new offensive line coach Joe Pendry, and was able to play every game from there on out and make an impact.
You were a part of the 2009 National Championship at Alabama, which would have been Saban's first at Alabama. And I personally think that 09 team is probably one of the best, if not the best, Alabama teams of all time. But looking back now, winning a national championship's obviously got to be special. But looking back and knowing that, you were a part of that first team that kind of laid that foundation for the years to come has to feel extra special.
I think it definitely does. And if you talk to most people about that group, a lot of times in college sports, where you say, or even in pro sports, you'll hear coaches, kind of use the term, "Hey, we got a good group of veterans and a talented group of young guys." So that is precisely what we had. We had not really, we didn't have upperclassmen that were part of number one, recruiting classes. Our senior class, which was a combination of my group that signed in 05 that redshirted, and the guys that were, true freshmen that played in 2006 under Mike Shula. I think, I don't know, maybe 15th ranked, 20th ranked signing class. We were just a hungry group. And you added that alongside some of the young pieces like a Julio Jones and a Mark Ingram, that they were able to sign in 2008, the number one recruiting class, and Dante Hightower and all these other guys. We had a perfect mix. Honestly, we had a great mix of guys that's at the top, good leadership, hungry, Rolando McClain style players, and the group of younger guys, like I said, Julio, Mark Ingram, that were extremely talented and really ready to send it to the next level. So I take a lot of pride in that because, simply put, I was able to really dig my heels in, develop as a player throughout those first couple of years of Coach Saban being there, and then leave my imprint on other players. I still love some of the younger guys that didn't even play on that team, the Chance Warmacks of the world, DJ Fluker, other guys that were behind me in that offensive line room, that you're able to kind of leave your lasting impact in that realm. I would love to think that the leadership that we were able to display in 2008 and 2009 maybe that directly, impacted those teams in 2011 and 2012. So, yeah, I'd say I take a lot of pride. And every time I go back there, there's always a couple of guys that are around that'll tell the current players, hey, this guy helped start this. And I wear that as an absolute badge of honor. It's always a pleasure going back there and knowing that what you did helped impact that legacy moving forward.
I completely forgot about DJ Fluker. That man was strong as an ox.
DJ Fluker, I was asked to stop by his recruiting dinner. I guess that would have been fall of 2008, maybe January of 2009. And that was right before my senior year. So at this point, I'm kind of the leader of the offensive line group, the elder statesman. They kind of asked me to stop by his dinner. I think they were upstairs at Chuck's Fish, and they're like, "Hey, we need this guy. He's a 5-star prospect, good player." And I walked in, and I shook his hand, and I'll never forget it. He's got the biggest hands of any man you've ever met in your life. To the point where I think he wore a 20 or 20, maybe a 21 size shoe. And his hands were just like that. His hands, I shook his hand, and his middle finger touched me in the middle of my forearm. And I'll never forget it as long as I
Jeez.
live. It was the craziest thing. I looked down, and his middle finger, as he's shaking my hand, is on the middle of my wrist. And I was like, my God. I was like, look at the bear paws on this guy. So yeah, I had a good chat with DJ that night. He's from Foley, or at least he went to high school down in Foley, in my neck of the woods, not far from Pensacola, and we developed a good relationship. He's a good dude, and yeah, it was a pleasure being around a lot of those guys.
It's funny because, some of these guys, you'll think, hey, that dude has got to be, the biggest guy around. There's no doubt he looks huge on TV. And then you see him in person, you're like, well, he's not that big. And then you see, some former players come back to watch practice or something, and you're like, holy crap, dude. I didn't realize how absolutely ginormous that guy is. Like Julio
Yeah,
Jones. I remember I saw him one time and I was like, dude, his shoulders are about, and his shoulders and his back are about as wide as this hallway, it seems like. But
Julio was probably he's probably the most naturally chiseled person I've ever seen. Like I remember when he got to the Falcons, and one of the he was drafted there during the lockout to Atlanta, and I was one of the only people that knew him at the time because I played college ball with him. And one of my friends saw him, and he goes, "The guy's got like a roadmap of veins like in his shin." And I was like, "Yeah, that's Julio."
yeah,
I mean, but if you were around the program, you've probably been around guys like Evan Neal. I mean, I tell people all the time, I'm lucky that I got into the program when I did, because some of the people they've recruited, Caden Proctor and some of these other guys over the last few years, they're just next level big. I mean, just absolutely mammoth human beings. I see people that think I'm big at 6'5", played at 305, probably 285 now, and these guys that play at Bama on this offensive line these days are just gigantic human beings.
speaking of Evan Neal, I actually have a funny story about Evan Neal. It was during the summer, and it was in between. You know how it is in between. When they have the youth camps during the day, and then we'll have like our 7-on-7 and stuff, kind of in the late afternoon.
Hmm.
And I was doing, I was working with the offensive line, and I was acting as defensive lineman, and we were kind of making sure that they were picking up stunts and everything. So I shot one gap, and mind you, I'm not in anything. They're in pads,
Right.
and I kind of get caught up in a gap, and I feel like they're about to fall on top of me, and he's trying to like stumble, trying to straddle me to not fall on top of me, and he just holds me up by my shirt, and I'm just kind of parallel to the ground. He's just holding me by my shirt, and then he kind of puts me back on the ground and go back to the next play. So, yeah,
It's a humbling feeling. All of a sudden you
yes,
get treated like an infant.
yeah. You're like, thank you, Evan, for not squishing me. But
Yeah.
you played with another Pensacola relative at Alabama, Trent Richardson. I don't know if he was kind of coming to Tuscaloosa as you were leaving, but who did you play against in high school that you later crossed paths with in college or the NFL?
Oh man, I actually and I was teammates for Trent with Trent for a year. Was part of his recruiting process, which was cool because I remember meeting a guy named Keith Brown, who was a wide receiver at Bama and was from Pensacola when I was being recruited, and I thought that was the coolest thing. I don't know. I do remember playing. My last high school game was against one of my Bama teammates, Roy Upchurch, and I played him my last high school game. We were in the first round of the Florida playoffs. They beat us. He was at Godby High School in Tallahassee. They beat us out. I played against a number of guys that I ended up at Bama with. As far as facing off with guys that I would eventually face off with in college, I don't know that I can even think of one. Now, I'll tell you one of the guys that I always actually really butted heads with in high school was Trent's brother. Trent's brother was my age. His name's Terrell, and he went to, I believe, Louisiana Lafayette, and he was actually a lot taller than Trent. He was like 6'6" and played defensive end, was a really good football player. But yeah, other than that, I actually, when I was very young, maybe a freshman or sophomore, actually got a chance to square off with a guy that now is known as Roman Reigns. He was
Wow.
he's from Pensacola. Yeah, Joe Anawa was his name when he was back there.
Did
So
he play football
that
at
was
Georgia
always
Tech?
interesting. Yeah, I went to Georgia Tech,
Yeah.
and then eventually became Roman Reigns. And his cousins, I think they go by the Usos. They were my age as well over there in Pensacola, and kind of grew up seeing them around and playing in high school and different things. But yeah, I mean, not anybody that I can really think off the top of my head that's played against. Just in terms of football, it just there was always a lot of talent down there. Just never wound up kind of squaring off with anybody. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me take that back. Not the offensive line or defensive line wise. My junior year of high school, we played Pat White, who ended up as a quarterback at West Virginia.
Stud.
And let me tell you something. That guy might be one of the best athletes of all time in college football. He was special. So yeah, we played Daphne High School when I was a junior, and Pat White was their quarterback. That was somebody I didn't play him in college, but my goodness, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to watch that guy play football for sure. So yeah, that's about the extent of it. Nothing too crazy, but definitely had some memories with a lot of those guys.
When you were drafted by the Falcons in 2010, it was the final pick of the third round, and you were cleaning up your apartment, getting ready for the fourth round when you got a call from Arthur Blank. And there had already been some Bama guys in Flowery Branch, like John Parker Wilson, and then shortly after that, Julio Jones and a couple others come. But as an NFL rookie, how beneficial was it to see your former college quarterback in the locker room with you?
Oh, it was unbelievably valuable. He actually was probably the first call I received after the draft pick call, was from John Parker, and he was excited for me. I ended up heading up to. He lived right by. You'll love this because I know you're a Buford guy. He lived right across the street from the Mall of Georgia, right there on Buford Drive.
Oh yeah,
Right there behind what I guess is Ted's Montana Grill over there.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and so I didn't know where I was going. I had to report for a rookie mini camp the following weekend, and they obviously the team was putting us up, but the process was you show up that morning, they check you in, you go through practice, and then that night they'd put you up in a hotel. But I wanted to get there a little bit early because I wasn't flying in, I was driving. So I asked John Parker if I could crash on his couch the night before, and drove up to Buford. That was my one of my first times up in Buford, Georgia, and stayed the night with John Parker, and just knew the ins and the outs of everything before actually arriving because he kind of gives you the rundown, and it was really cool, man. He's one of my best buddies still to this day. See him all the time. He's doing great things over there, living in Mountain Brook, and I was in his wedding a few years after that, and just really cherished the insight that he gave me of that transition, just making it just that much easier, getting a chance to know guys like Matt Ryan and other guys that were part of that locker room was just that much easier because you go play golf with John Parker and those guys or whoever else and get a chance to kind of get entrenched in that group.
He and Matt Ryan are probably my two favorite quarterbacks of all time, and I've been fortunate enough to meet both of them. And before we started this, I told you about my encounter with Matt Ryan. But do you have any good stories of either one? Give me your best Matt Ryan or John Parker story.
Well, look, I mean, the Matt Ryan thing, he's just such a good dude. And at the point that, I was there, he was, I don't know, 3 or 4 years in the league. Was a married guy, was pretty settled down and reserved. He didn't do too much crazy, but I just, he was a great teammate, great dude. And I tell people all the time that, I had a chance to sit down and have quite a few beers with Matt over the years, and the best kind of positive note that I can leave people with about Matt is I don't know that we ever sat down for a beer that he didn't grab the tab for. I mean, he was just that kind of guy. It was you never expected him to. It's just not the person I am or most of the teammates. Everybody's got a little bit of money, but Matt would always kind of step up no matter what and kind of grab that and have a good time. And I remember him actually. We went to dinner for John Parker Wilson's birthday one year up there in Buford, and he kind of grabbed everybody's tab and paid for everybody's beer, which he's just a good guy, man. He's there's a lot of locker room stories and things like that in terms of just having fun, but he's a lot of fun to be around. Now, John Parker Wilson, that's a whole nother chapter of life. You go through you go through college with a guy, and get around the bar scene over in Tuscaloosa and do some of those things. You get to know somebody a little bit more personally. But look, man, he's one of those guys that I love to death, man. And he's a lot the same way that John Parker, good teammate, one of the tougher guys you'll ever be around. And just it was a pleasure to honestly play with both of them. Very, very similar, very humble guys. And good quarterbacks, always played with a little bit of grit. I think John Parker was well liked over in Atlanta by the coaching staff over there because he did emulate Matt Ryan a lot and kind of had that grit and threw a good ball, and they trusted him. So, yeah, man, I mean, I can't tell you how many times that I've protected John Parker, both on the field and possibly in a bar from time to time. So, yeah, man, I enjoyed hanging out with both those guys, man. Both solid teammates, to say the least.
I remember hearing you say one time that your welcome to the NFL moment was when you lined up next to Tony Gonzalez in training camp, and you looked down and was like, "Holy shit, that's Tony Gonzalez's hand." Um,
Yeah.
out of all the superstars you played with in Atlanta, what separated them from everyone else off the field? Because we all know how great they were on the field, but off the field, how did they, go about themselves in a way that you wouldn't have to even watch them play to know that this guy's the real deal?
I preparation of their bodies, especially for Tony, but even guys like Roddy White, Michael Turner. I played with a number of guys that were decades long players. Todd McClure, who was a center out of LSU, played for, I don't know, 13, 14 years. It was always how well you took care of your body. And I learned a lot from those guys, about how to do that. And Tony was the best. Tony was, still, 35, 36 with a six pack and, always just doing all the right things. Tony he was at a different level when it came to taking care of yourself. And I think a lot of guys, in college, and you've been around the program, that there's guys that'll go to the bar and then they'll show up to the workout. You can almost sometimes smell the whiskey in there in the weight room in Alabama, because there's some guys that just show up to those 6 a.m.ers and they've been drinking all night.
Rounders.
But the older you got, the more you couldn't really pull that off. And that was one of the, talking to Tony was one of the first times I realized that you can't pull that off anymore. The older you get, and the NFL is different, man. The NFL, when you're done in January, whenever it is, the coach kind of steps in the locker room, says, "Hey, everybody, thanks for your work this year, and hey, we'll see you at the end of April for minicamp." It's we're starting OTAs or whatever. So, you're kind of in charge of yourself. And watching Tony and Roddy and Matt and a number of those guys over the years, take care of themselves and do everything necessary to make sure they were in good shape, man. Just, off-season training, but also deep tissue massage and their diet and eating clean. And to me, that's what always separates the guys. Now, you obviously need the high-level athletic ability, but, when those guys really hit that long tenure, that longevity, it's a combination of things. And I always looked at Tony, the way he kind of took care of himself, man. He wasn't a guy that, was going to do anything too crazy drinking wise or partying. He was very about his business. And they say your body is you're the CEO of your body. When it comes to the NFL, they absolutely emulated that in all phases. So that was very eye-opening for me. And you mentioned the story about kind of seeing Tony's hand on the ground. I will never forget that as long as I live because I thought, man, here this guy is. He's probably already a Hall of Famer. I am just this rookie that's my head's spinning, and here I am in practice making double team calls with Tony on these run plays. It was just a cool moment.
That's awesome. Um, the winningest coach in Falcons history, and probably the most beloved coach in Falcons history, Mike Smith, drafted you in 2010, and in 2014 they unfortunately fired him. But as a player, to see the coach that drafted you get fired, how does that play on your psyche? I would imagine that you almost kind of feel a sense of responsibility or just bummed out because
Yeah,
that's the guy that gave you your opportunity.
it was a lot how I felt. Like I said about Mike Shula, that you feel like you owe something to Mike Smith. And to be honest with you, for a long time, I had a sense of guilt about that, and still do in some ways. But it's cool now, being in the media world. I ran into Mike Smith probably, let's call it maybe 8 or 9 months ago. I ran into Mike Smith at a charity golf tournament, and I wasn't even going to bother him, because I still have that kind of guilt on me. You know what I mean? I think a lot of guys that played for Mike Smith feel like that. He was very fatherly to a lot of people, and he I looked up and he was making a beeline for me. We were at Capital City Club over in Brookhaven. He's kind of making a beeline for me, and he stuck his hand out and he was like, "Mike, it's so good to see you. How are you doing? He said, I saw a picture on Facebook of you and your kids. Man, it's just, I'm glad you're doing well." And that was that was a big moment for me personally. That I got a chance to catch up with him and kind of be on a friendly note. Mike very briefly got back into, I think he was a defense coordinator in Tampa for a little bit, but I was always just very thankful for him and the leadership he displayed for the Falcons. And I'm with you. I think a lot of Falcons fans still love him. And he actually asked me, I'll never forget it. He said, "Mike, you go back to these alumni events much? What's the feeling around the alumni events?" And I just kind of cracked up at him asking me that. And I just wanted to be like, "Mike, people love you, man. You can come back whenever you're ready. I'm sure that the Falcons fans are all ready to be happy, with you." And so yeah, his tenure came to an unfortunate end in Atlanta. So did mine. We kind of were done about the same time. Mine was because of injuries, and his was because of getting fired. But yeah, I have a lot of love for him and Mike Shula as well. But that's an interesting feeling. It's a good question.
Why do you think that Mike Smith is kind of self-conscious about the way the Falcons fans view him? Because I mean, like you said, he's everybody loves him and wishes that he was still coaching.
Well, look, I think that when it comes to a close and when it's at the end, and you get fired, and everybody's saying, "Hey, it's time to fire this guy. We need to fire this guy. We need to fire this guy." And Mike Smith's not a Twitter user, not a big time social media guy. So his lasting impression is probably, "Hey, we need to fire this guy." And so I
Mm.
think it's kind of hard to flip your brain around and say, "Man, we had some good years there," but I think as a coach, you probably have to kind of forget how it came to an end and then realize, you do have a place in the history of that team. And so I hope he's back around the Falcons eventually, man, because I think he is in a lot of Falcons fan circles. I think he's beloved.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, man, I appreciate it. I got two more questions for you. Like I said, I know you're a busy guy, so I don't want to keep you. And I know it's maybe a sore topic to talk about, but I got to ask you about the 2012 NFC Championship versus the 49ers. And I actually remember um, being at that game and seeing you line up at tight end a couple times. If correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong there. But
yeah, you
as,
did.
as we know, the game ended on a goal line slant to Roddy White that was disrupted by Patrick Willis that I still believe to this day should have been PI. But what was the atmosphere in the locker room after the game to know that you were basically one play away from the Super Bowl?
Is downtrodden to say the least. That was a good 49ers team under Jim Harbaugh, and they were at a good place, but we felt like we had the talent to make that run. We were a good team that year. And the NFL, it is what it is. Dynasties are few and far between. Sometimes when you get that close, you wonder if it'll ever happen again. And I remember talking to some of my veteran teammates and them just kind of saying it's really hard to get to this point. It was the farthest anybody in that locker room had ever been in their career. And, kind of hoped we could get back there, but injuries happen. The contracts happen, money happens, just different things come about, and never able to kind of get back to that point. And you mentioned a couple years later, Mike Smith's fired, but that was one of the tougher locker rooms of my career. That and the '08 SEC title game, I'd say the two toughest locker rooms I've been in. And you just wonder what you could have done differently. In my case, like you said, I was playing a lot of tight end that day. We had some success and hoped it could have gone different. You could have, scored some points at the end to go to the Super Bowl, but that's as close as I ever got, and that was a sad moment for a lot.
I felt bad for Tony because he retired what that next year, or that was his
He
final
came
game.
back, yeah, he came back the following year to try to make one more run. We weren't able to do it, and yeah, he had to hang him up after that. But I'm with you. I still feel bad about that to this day. That's a guy that deserves a Super Bowl ring. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah, for sure. Mike, to wrap this up, I wanted to ask you kind of a fun question. Since you're a former Falcon, now covering the Falcons, as a fan, who was your favorite Falcon growing up? And since retiring from football, who has been your favorite Falcon?
It's a good question growing up. Obviously, the Falcons of the late '90s were a pretty good squad. The Jamal Anderson, Chris Chandler, Bob Whitfield, Ray Buchanan, those kind of guys on into that. Actually, I would say probably early 2000s. Patrick Kearney. I was a big fan of Patrick
Oh yeah.
Kearney. And it's interesting. I didn't grow up a Falcons fan. I was a Miami Dolphins fan for the longest time when I was younger. I loved Dan Marino. But yeah, I'd say looking at those teams, a lot of good players. So yeah, I mean, maybe Patrick Kearney would be one of those guys. Some of those other players from that '98 Super Bowl run. But not one of them really sticks out until Kearney. I think he probably came on when I was in high school. I want to say he had a big year in like 2001 or 2002. But yeah, man, as far as guys I've followed now, or at least since I've been done, I played with Matt, and to me, he's the greatest Falcon of all time. And I played with a number of those guys that are in that conversation: Michael Turner, Tony Gonzalez, Roddy White, Brian Finneran, on down the list. As of right now, I've had a chance to interview so many of them that it's kind of hard to put a finger on. I really had a blast interviewing Kirk Cousins. Good dude, as you can imagine, a lot of fun to talk to. Really enjoyed interviewing Drake London. Just soft spoken guy, but really a physical player. And yeah, I mean, Grady Jarrett probably comes to mind. Now, Grady showed up a year after I was done. He was in Dan Quinn's first year with the Atlanta Falcons, but consummate professional. I think he was just announced again as the Falcons' Walter Payton Man of the Year. So I have a lot of respect for him. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of guys around that franchise right now that good players. AJ Terrell, had a lot of fun talking to him. He's a Clemson guy. And yeah, there's just a bunch of them, man. So I'd say as right now it's Kirk Cousins, but he's coming off a few tough weeks. So check back with me later. I'll let you know how I feel a month or two from now. But yeah, it's a lot of those guys I've met and got a chance to talk to and interview and all the other stuff. So the list gets pretty long at that point.
Yeah, Kurt got to cut down on those interceptions, but that's a solid list, man. Patrick Kearney, he was a stud, definitely in
Stud.
Seattle too. But man, I
Yep.
appreciate this. This has been awesome as a lifelong Falcons fan and Alabama fan, man. This is really cool to chop it up with you, and I appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Yeah, no worries, man. Rise up and roll tide. See if either one of those teams can make some noise in the playoffs here pretty soon. We'll see.
Absolutely, we're hoping so. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, man.